There's a magnetic treatment for soil and water that has tripled crop yields in carefully documented scientific experiments conducted continuously for over 270 years. The technique requires no synthetic fertilizer of any kind. It demands no chemical pesticides or herbicides. It needs no genetically modified seeds or expensive drip irrigation systems. It uses only the invisible magnetic forces that exist naturally everywhere on Earth to stimulate plant growth in ways that modern industrial agriculture absolutely refuses to acknowledge or investigate. In 1749, a French priest and physicist conducted a series of systematic experiments that should have changed farming forever and fed billions more people. He carefully exposed seeds to electrical and magnetic fields generated by early electromagnetic devices before planting them in prepared soil. He meticulously documented germination rates that doubled compared to untreated control seeds. He recorded growth speeds that tripled under controlled experimental conditions. He published his detailed findings in respected scientific journals of his era, where they attracted significant attention. The agricultural and scientific establishment of Europe took serious notice of these remarkable results, and something very strange happened over the following decades. The promising research continued for many years across multiple European countries with consistent results. Major universities replicated the findings using their own experimental designs. Working farmers who implemented the techniques reported harvests that defied conventional explanation. The evidence accumulated steadily in scientific literature that anyone with library access could read and verify for themselves. And then slowly, quietly, and very systematically, the entire field of study disappeared from mainstream agricultural science as if it had never existed at all. The $200 billion fertilizer industry did not exist in 1749. By 1920, it had become one of the most powerful commercial forces in agriculture. By 1950, it controlled research funding at every major agricultural university. By 1980, it had successfully erased from public memory a technique that eliminated the need for its products entirely. The magnetic treatment that triples growth rates was not disproven. It was defunded, it was dismissed, it was deliberately forgotten by institutions that profit from selling what magnetism provides for free. This is the story of the forbidden science that could have transformed agriculture, the research that governments classified and corporations buried, and the simple technique that anyone can use today without permission from the industries that want it forgotten. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Let's begin. The science of magnetic plant stimulation begins with understanding that plants are electrical organisms. Every cell in every plant operates through electrical signaling. Nutrients move through root systems via electrical gradients. Growth hormones travel through stems following electrical pathways. Cell division itself requires precise electrical conditions to proceed correctly. Plants are not merely chemical systems. They are electrochemical systems where electricity is as fundamental as water. The Earth itself generates a massive magnetic field that all life evolved within. This geomagnetic field fluctuates constantly based on solar activity, seasonal changes, and location on the planet. Plants evolve sophisticated responses to these magnetic fluctuations over hundreds of millions of years. Their growth patterns, flowering times, and root development all respond to magnetic conditions. Modern agriculture ignores this electromagnetic reality almost completely. Fertilizer recommendations assume plants are purely chemical systems requiring chemical inputs. Irrigation systems treat water as a simple fluid without electrical properties. Soil management focuses on nutrient content while ignoring the electromagnetic conditions that determine whether plants can actually absorb those nutrients. Magnetic treatment addresses the electromagnetic dimension that conventional agriculture pretends does not exist. When water passes through a magnetic field, its molecular structure changes measurably. The clusters of water molecules reorganize into smaller, more uniform arrangements. The surface tension decreases. The ability to dissolve and transport minerals increases. The water becomes more biologically available to plant root systems. When seeds are exposed to magnetic fields before planting, their metabolic activity increases. Enzyme systems activate more rapidly. Cell membranes become more permeable to nutrients. Germination begins faster and proceeds more vigorously. The seedlings emerge stronger and grow more quickly than untreated seeds planted in identical conditions. These effects have been measured in controlled laboratory conditions by researchers who had no commercial interest in the outcome. The science is not speculative. It is documented. It is replicated. It is ignored. The history of magnetic agriculture begins with Abbé Jean-Antoine Nollet in France in 1749. Nollet was a physicist and priest who conducted systematic experiments on the effects of electricity and magnetism on living organisms. He exposed seeds to static electrical fields generated by early electrical devices. He planted treated and untreated seeds in identical soil conditions. He measured germination rates, growth speeds, and final yields with scientific precision unusual for his era. The results were unambiguous. Treated seeds germinated faster, treated plants grew more vigorously, treated crops produced larger yields. The differences were large enough to be obvious without statistical analysis. Nollet published his findings and attracted attention throughout European scientific circles. Other researchers replicated and extended his work over the following decades. German scientists confirmed the effects using different experimental designs. Italian researchers documented similar results with various crop species. British investigators added their own confirmations. The phenomenon appeared robust across multiple investigators, locations, and plant types. By the early 1800s, electromagnetic agriculture had become an established research area. Scientific societies discussed optimal field strengths and exposure durations. Agricultural journals published practical recommendations for farmers. The technology seemed poised to transform food production across Europe. Then the chemical fertilizer industry began its rise. The synthesis of ammonia for nitrogen fertilizer in the early 1900s created enormous commercial opportunities. Factories built for World War I explosives converted to fertilizer production after the war. Companies needed markets for their products and found them in agriculture. The industry funded agricultural research extensively and strategically. They supported scientists who studied chemical approaches to plant nutrition. They endowed university chairs focused on fertilizer applications. They shaped the direction of agricultural education toward approaches that required purchasing their products. Electromagnetic agriculture received no such support. The techniques required no purchased inputs. They generated no recurring revenue. They offered no profit opportunities for industrial suppliers. From a commercial perspective, magnetic treatment was worthless regardless of how well it worked. The Soviet Union conducted the most extensive and most carefully classified research on magnetic agriculture during the long decades of Cold War competition. Soviet agricultural science operated almost entirely outside the commercial pressures that dominated Western research. The centralized state controlled research priorities based on national productivity goals rather than corporate profit margins. Intense food security concerns following devastating famines motivated serious investigation of any technique that might increase yields regardless of commercial implications. Fierce ideological competition with the capitalist West actively encouraged exploring approaches that profit-driven capitalism had deliberately ignored or suppressed. Soviet researchers began comprehensive systematic magnetic agriculture studies in the early 1960s at multiple research institutes. They designed and built specialized precision equipment to generate exactly controlled magnetic fields of various strengths and configurations. They exposed seeds, irrigation water, and actively growing plants to various field strengths and exposure durations under controlled laboratory and field conditions. They documented detailed results across multiple growing seasons, soil types, climate zones, and crop varieties with scientific rigor that would satisfy any peer review process. The findings were remarkable enough that Soviet military and intelligence agencies imposed strict classification on the research. Published studies in classified Soviet agricultural journals reported yield increases ranging from 30 to over 300%, depending on specific crop type, growing conditions, and treatment protocol used. Tomato plants under magnetic treatment produced fruit clusters far larger and more numerous than untreated control plants. Wheat crops matured significantly faster, while simultaneously yielding substantially more grain per individual plant. The documented results consistently exceeded anything achievable through even the most intensive conventional chemical fertilization programs. The research appeared in classified Soviet agricultural journals unavailable to Western scientists. When the Soviet Union collapsed, some of these documents became accessible. Western researchers who reviewed them found methodologically sound studies with implications that contradicted everything the fertilizer industry had spent decades establishing. The Western agricultural establishment responded with silence rather than replication. No major American or European university launched programs to verify the Soviet findings. No agricultural agency funded follow-up studies. No scientific journal called for investigation of results that could have transformed global food production. The silence was not accidental. Verifying Soviet magnetic agriculture research would have threatened commercial interests too powerful to challenge. The fertilizer industry had spent decades building infrastructure, markets, and institutional relationships. Confirming that magnetism could replace fertilizer would have destroyed billions of dollars in asset value overnight. The USDA conducted its own magnetic agriculture research in the early 20th century before abandoning the field entirely. Documents from the 1920s show American agricultural scientists investigating electromagnetic effects on plant growth. They studied electrical stimulation of fields, magnetic seed treatment, and related techniques. Their reports noted promising results that warranted further investigation. They recommended expanded research programs to develop practical applications for American farmers. The recommendations were never implemented. Funding for electromagnetic agriculture research disappeared from USDA budgets by the mid-1920s. The scientists who conducted the studies moved to other projects or retired. The institutional knowledge accumulated over years of work dispersed without being applied. The timing coincided exactly with the explosive growth of the chemical fertilizer industry. Synthetic nitrogen production had become commercially viable. Fertilizer companies were establishing distribution networks across American farming regions. Agricultural policy was shifting toward approaches that required purchasing commercial inputs. The USDA increasingly aligned its research priorities with industry preferences. Funding flowed toward studies that supported fertilizer use. Extension services promoted chemical approaches to soil fertility. University partnerships channeled agricultural education toward methods that generated commercial activity. Electromagnetic agriculture offered no commercial activity to generate. The techniques worked with materials farmers already possessed or could acquire once with no recurring cost. There was no product to sell, no distribution network to build, no ongoing revenue stream to capture. From an industrial perspective, the research was commercially useless, regardless of its scientific validity. The USDA served commercial agriculture rather than challenging it. The agency that should have investigated yield-tripling techniques instead buried the research and pretended it never existed. Generations of American farmers never learned about methods their own government had confirmed and then concealed. The practical application of magnetic treatment requires only minimal equipment and absolutely no ongoing expenses after initial setup. Magnetized water is the simplest and most immediately accessible technique to implement in any gardener farm. Strong permanent magnets securely attached to irrigation lines or hoses expose water to magnetic fields as it flows naturally toward plants in beds or fields. The water molecule clusters physically reorganize into smaller and more uniform arrangements during passage through the magnetic field. The treated water subsequently delivers dissolved nutrients more effectively and penetrates compacted soil more thoroughly than chemically identical untreated water from the same source. Farmers around the world who have implemented magnetic water treatment systems report multiple significant and measurable benefits. Total water usage often decreases substantially because magnetically treated water penetrates soil more effectively and remains available to roots longer. Nutrient uptake improves measurably because treated water dissolves and transports soil minerals more efficiently to root surfaces. Overall, plant health increases noticeably because treated water supports stronger and more extensive root development throughout the growing season. These benefits compound across multiple growing seasons as soil biology improves. Magnetic seed treatment requires only brief exposure to strong magnetic fields before the normal planting process. Seeds placed near strong magnets for several hours to several days show accelerated germination and more vigorous early growth. The optimal exposure time varies by species, but the effect appears consistent across plant types. Treated seeds emerge faster and grow stronger than untreated seeds from the same source. Atmospheric antennas represent a more elaborate approach with historical precedent. Copper or zinc rods placed in growing areas can collect atmospheric electrical energy and channel it into soil. The technique was documented in agricultural literature from the 1700s through early 1900s before disappearing from mainstream practice. Modern practitioners report growth improvements consistent with historical accounts. The cost of implementing any of these techniques is minimal compared to annual fertilizer expenditure. A set of strong magnets suitable for water treatment costs less than $50 and lasts indefinitely. Copper wire for atmospheric antennas costs even less. The entire magnetic agriculture toolkit requires a one-time investment smaller than a single season's fertilizer purchase. The economic comparison explains why the fertilizer industry cannot allow magnetic treatment to gain mainstream acceptance. A farmer who discovers that magnets triple yields while eliminating fertilizer costs will never purchase fertilizer again. That farmer becomes a permanent revenue loss. If that farmer tells neighboring farmers who confirm the results, the losses multiply exponentially. The suppression of magnetic agriculture operates through institutional control rather than direct prohibition. No law forbids using magnets to treat seeds or water. The technique is not illegal in any jurisdiction. Farmers who implement magnetic treatment face no regulatory penalty. The suppression works through absence rather than prohibition. Agricultural education never mentions electromagnetic approaches. Students completing degrees in agronomy, horticulture, or soil science never encounter magnetic treatment in their coursework. Textbooks omit the research history entirely. Professors, trained in the conventional paradigm, pass their ignorance to the next generation of agricultural professionals. Extension services provide no guidance on magnetic implementation. Farmers seeking information from official agricultural sources find nothing about electromagnetic techniques. The knowledge gap leaves farmers dependent on fertilizer recommendations that extension services do provide extensively. Scientific journals rarely publish magnetic agriculture research. Reviewers trained in conventional approaches dismiss electromagnetic studies as implausible regardless of methodology. The peer review system filters out research that contradicts established paradigms. Young scientists learn quickly that pursuing magnetic agriculture offers no career advancement. The result is systematic erasure without explicit censorship. No committee decided to forbid magnetic agriculture. No memo instructed agricultural institutions to suppress the research. The suppression emerged organically from commercial pressures, shaping every node in the agricultural knowledge system. The fertilizer industry did not need to conspire. They simply needed to fund the research they wanted done and ignore the research that threatened them. Market forces did the rest. Scientists followed funding toward chemical agriculture. Institutions aligned with their funders. Knowledge that served no commercial interest faded from collective memory. The magnetic treatment that reliably triples growth rates is waiting patiently for any farmer or gardener willing to conduct their own experiments. The magnets themselves are completely legal to purchase from any hardware store or online retailer. The techniques are entirely legal to implement on any private property. The only real barrier standing between you and tripled yields is the knowledge that agricultural institutions have deliberately withheld from public awareness for over a century. Breaking through that barrier requires nothing more complicated than learning what you were intentionally never taught and trying what you were systematically never told to try. The fertilizer industry cannot sue farmers for using magnets. They cannot regulate what happens on private property with legal equipment. They can only maintain the ignorance that keeps farmers purchasing products they do not need. Once that ignorance breaks, their control breaks with it. Every gardener who experiments with magnetic water treatment becomes evidence. Every farmer who implements seed magnetization and documents the results adds to a body of knowledge that institutions can no longer suppress. Every shared experience erodes the artificial ignorance that protects $200 billion in annual fertilizer sales. The French priest who documented magnetic plant stimulation in 1749 could never have imagined the commercial forces that would bury his findings. He published his research expecting it to benefit humanity. He assumed that knowledge which helps people grow food would spread naturally. He did not anticipate industries that profit from inefficiency working systematically to ensure his discoveries would never reach common practice. 275 years later, his experiments remain valid. The physics has not changed. The biology has not changed. Only the commercial interests preventing application have grown more powerful and more sophisticated in maintaining suppression. The magnetic treatment works exactly as documented across nearly 3 centuries of research. The only question is whether you will try it yourself or continue believing that tripling growth rates requires products you must purchase forever. Now you finally understand why this remarkably effective technique remains forbidden. Not forbidden by any law, forbidden by economics, forbidden by captured institutions, forbidden by an entire agricultural system deliberately designed to extract continuous payment rather than genuinely maximize production for farmers. Now you know what they never wanted you to learn. If this opens something for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every single like and share spreads what they tried to keep buried for centuries. See you in the next one.